Hope sent a quiver. Written by OrionLady on AO3. Chapter 4. For 6 days this continued, this weird sort of truce where the kid didn't actively run away, barring the reading/panic attack fiasco, but he also actively pretended Clint didn't exist. Clint asked him about the spy book, but the kid was mum on everything, let alone the source of his panic attacks. So Clint told him terrible jokes. Sometimes he played soft music on his phone, setting it on his chest, and cherished the sight of it lulling the kid to sleep. Clint also had an odd desire to explain circus tricks. He'd lay there for hours and talk about moves he hadn't thought about in years. "Nothing like gymnastics," he'd said once. "It's the best physical base for other sports, because it teaches flexibility, cardio, and balance." The kid nodded slightly. "Right?" Clint played it as cool as he could, despite his heart whacking away at the anvil of his sternum. "Backflipping off a high surface is a special experience very few people get to have. The way you're flying for a few milliseconds, defying the air." Clint watched in fascination as the tip of the kid's exposed ear turned beet red. With zero idea what to make of that, he resumed his endless chatter. Persistence. "Trapeze artistry was my favourite, even though I also learned flaming archery in the circus. I'm a carny, or was, a fact which very few people know, so don't go blabbing it to the media." A pair of crossed fingers flicked out from under the blanket. "Cross my heart," Clint translated the childish gesture. He hid a smile. It struck Clint around day 8 that the kid wasn't just actively pretending Clint didn't exist. He craved the sound of him talking. The silence wasn't simply a way to keep him at arm's length. He's listening. Well, obviously he was listening. Where else could he go? Short of running away, never to be seen by Clint or anyone else again, which the kid clearly wasn't gunning for. He was stuck with Clint's one-man radio show. This farm apparently represented the end of the kid's railway track, the last of his running. But something about the way he held his breath when Clint came to suspenseful parts of a story, or nosed further under the comforter if something was scary or sad, told Clint he needed this almost more than food. The hammock sat empty on this particular morning, but Clint wasn't perturbed. He unfolded a red-checkered blanket, and how had it taken him this long to think of that solution instead of laying cold turkey on the ground, and spread it over the grassy section by the oak. His first thought had been a lawn chair, but that put him at eye level with the kid. Intimidating. The boy's strangely light footsteps crunched closer. He froze upon seeing Clint already there, and zipped up his fly. "Hope you don't mind that I made myself at home." "You're home," the boy signed. Clint's heart sprinted. The kid, he'd expressed a full sentence again. "Yeah, well, this is your space for now. I try not to set up shop when you're not here." The boy firmed his lips and walked in a wide circle around Clint for the hammock. A VFX manual lay open by his backpack, halfway done. "I just thought of something. Do you have a solution for your other toilet needs?" The kid sent him a flat look. "Look, man, I potty trained 3 kids and went undercover in places like the Gulag. TMI topics are old hat at this point." The boy studied him for a moment longer. Clint's sprawled profile on the picnic blanket, then dug through his pack. He showed Clint a small trowel and a fat roll of toilet paper. It looked industrial, like what they put in gas stations. Likely stolen, and Clint shouldn't have felt as proud about that as he did. Kid's nothing if not resourceful. Cool. That's a field-approved method. Let me know if you run out of toilet paper." The kid nodded a fist. Clint, desperate to keep him communicating, pointed to his face. "Those bruises are finally starting to heal. Ribs feel okay?" Another nod, but the kid probed at his cheek with a suddenly open expression. A brief supernova of delight blazed through his eyes and was gone in the next blink. Without a mirror, Clint figured the kid couldn't see how the purple blotches had faded to green. "Consistent meals are helping, I assume, even if you do eat like a bird." The kid's hands signed absently while he put the trowel and paper away. "You're the bird." Clint burst out laughing. It was so like a comment that Cooper would have made when he was a tween and wanted to show how clever he was to the adults. Clint's bellows tapered off into snickers. He sat up, clutching his stomach. Oh, I needed that. You've got some sass in you, kid. When he looked over, the boy was paler than a hospital sheet. Fine trembles ran up his hands. He backed away from Clint, circling a hand around his heart over and over and, hey, none of that. Clint sobered. No sorries, it was funny. I'm glad you have enough spirit left to make a joke. But the kid's ghostly face didn't dissipate. If anything, he shook harder, complete with little hiccuping sounds that stabbed Clint like a fork in the eye. Guilt and stress stained the boy's face around the bruises. The stress of Clint's presence made complete sense, even if they'd been keeping a healthy physical distance between them, but... Guilt? Clint floundered, trying to read it. Why is he guilty about joking around? Kid, if I did something to... Oh... The kid shook his head again. Leave me alone. Speaking. He'd spoken again. Then the words hit. Not a snapped demand, not the way Nathaniel said those 3 words when Clint put him in time out for disobeying a direct order in place for his safety. No, Nate, we cannot play with the stove burners. I know you know this. I hate you. You never let me have any fun. Leave me alone. All petulance and fickle anger. This wasn't some childish lash-out in payment of Clint's unwavering and potentially irritating presence that he, technically, had not asked the boy if he was okay with. The kid said it again and stressed out the same 2 words. Leave me alone. The supplicant note got Clint onto his feet and away from the hammock, hands up. All right, kid, I'm going. Ow! A glass shattered, trilled and rattled the whole world, or maybe just the space between them, but either way it was all the same. More disappointment and heartache and promises that would never come true. Clint's heart pinched inside his chest. His head spun long after he emerged from the trees and headed for the barn. A headache brewed beneath his eye sockets, cold to hot in waves that left him nauseous. One day at a time, Clint, he repeated in a choked whisper. One day at a time. Tick, 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 tick. Clint stared up at the mobile. He held himself still so Laura wouldn't feel his uneven breaths and wake. 1:18 in the morning, and Clint was a piece of cloth being torn along the bias, in about 10 different directions. A smart person would have tranquilized the kid to Kingdom Come and trucked him off to the nearest emergency room. He would have run away from a hospital, and you know it. Or, more tactfully, sedated him and brought him back to the farm to sleep a few nights on their couch, right before they called child services to get him away from his abusive family. Someone had to be running ragged looking for him. A cold wave to the nostrils to think about, whether looking meant someone worried for the boy's safety, or someone angry enough to beat him unconscious. Clint almost hoped no one found him, not until the kid sorted himself out. Honest to God, who was Clint to be lying here on a plush mattress under a solid, recently reshingled roof with a belly full of chocolate cake from Cooper's 17th birthday party when a malnourished teen lay shivering in the woods of his property and looked like the world had spit him back out Jonah style? Bringing him to your house against his will would have betrayed his trust even more, said the melodic, bourbon-smooth voice, one that sounded suspiciously like Natasha. Shut up, Clint told it, barely an exhale. But, try as he might, he couldn't sleep. Couldn't wipe the kid's devastated face from his mind. All because he'd made a jab at Clint and relaxed around him for 2 entire minutes. What are you truly afraid of, kid? Clint's line of work had been dedicated to reading what other people couldn't see, noticing the micro-expressions and peculiar details that didn't line up. From the secretary, who turned out to be a double agent, that he'd spotted for Fury because her cell phone case kept changing every few days. Turns out she was using them to smuggle out microdrives, breaking the case each time to hold open the cooling units where the chips were stored. to the way Lila swirled her fork at supper if she'd had a bad day. It all mattered, and he saw it all. And yet, this kid was blank, completely blank. Clint had visually dissected the boy countless times and couldn't make heads or tails of him. From his love of picture books to the ASL, to how fearful he was of talking to Clint. None of it followed a set pattern, at least not one Clint had seen before. Something in his gut pulled a different kind of alarm. Screw it. Clint flung off the covers and threw on his fluffiest sweatpants. This time he did take his boots, with the cold night air, along with a spare hoodie he never wore anymore. Walking proved harder without the moon this time, but Clint didn't get his asinine superhero nickname for nothing. He stopped, practiced army tricks to help his eyes adjust to the gloom, and once he could spot shapes in his peripheral vision, kept moving. Grasses hissed around his ankles, top of his hair a ruffle from lukewarm breezes. Stepping off onto an alien planet felt a bit like this last time he did it, and the abrupt hush and barometric pressure differentials, some his body had never experienced before. The smell of water tainted with minerals his nose had never encountered, and probably never would again. The sensor flashed on his phone, as usual, and Clint clicked off the screen to preserve his night vision. He was close now. Please. Clint stopped again, this time to suss out the high-pitched cry. Faint, muffled, but definitely coming from the hammock. Not a sound these woods had heard before. Clint opened his mouth and thought better of it. He hustled the last few feet, eyes drawn to a tense mass in the hammock. Sorry, I'm sorry. Sweat coated every inch of the kid's exposed skin, comforter hanging half on the ground. He clenched at the fabric of his own shirt so hard the seams pops. His head writhed to either side. Oh. At first, Clint paused, thinking the words were a warning intended for him. He heeded them like a small animal screeches about a predator nearby. Then Clint closed the distance and realized the kid wasn't awake at all. Limp curls stuck to his mottled skin, almost black with moisture, and painted it in cystine swirls. Clint had seen a lot in his day, things he couldn't even say out loud to Laura for fear of second-hand traumatizing her. But he'd rarely seen this brand of anguish. It reminded him of the day he found Tony in the compound before the time travel test, weeping over a photo he never let any of them see. Tears leaked from the kid's scrunched eyes, those gasp sounds raised in volume, strangled from the inside out, and he begged. Clint's own breath caught the rasped, please, and don't want to go. Kid. This wasn't the beg of a prisoner or mugging victim. This was the sound of a child to a parent in agony from that bond being severed, high, frenzied waving on the ends of the words. Lila sounded like that the day she got lost in the mall and warbled, Dad, from across the food court. Had someone kicked this kid out of the house? Was he in exile from his own family? Whatever it was, Clint wasn't going to let him live in it for a second longer. He stepped back, but also raised his voice. Kid? Oh. Kid, you're asleep and dreaming, I promise. Garbage disposals had more finesse than this kid's voice, vocal cords waking from what sounded like a long and dry slumber. To blood. Hear that? That's my voice, Clint Barton, bringer of delicious pizza and dumb books. You know me. Something about that sentence got through. The boy's eyes popped open in opalescent candor, and he pulled in a breath that sounded painful. Kid. The boy dove off the hammock only to slide to his knees beside the fire pit. I'm here. Clint crouched beside him, but left a good margin. You're not alone, kid. Take a minute. You are having a nightmare. The kid sobbed, a ragged child in distress bark that had hairs standing on Clint's neck. His eyes prickled. Even in his children's darkest hours, they'd never made a sound like that. The kid opened his mouth for a second go at it, and out came the remains of last night's supper, or what used to be last night's supper. The kid heaved so hard he had to brace both hands on the ground, on all fours and keening around the vomit spells. "Easy, kid," Clint swore. "Let it out." There wasn't much in the kid's shriveled stomach, so he tapered off in dry heaves. Tears mingled with the sick, and the kid's arms quivered. That second tattered sob came out after all, ending in a wail. Something visceral, a surgeon's scalpel on bone, gored Clint from the inside. His hand shot out before he could overthink. The weight of it settled on the kid's back, not pressing, but not tentative either. Vertebrae met Clint's palm in a bony chain-link ridge, void of enough tissue to cloak it. The kid felt cooler to the touch than Clint had expected. The boy's head shot up and he twisted away. Clint removed his hand at once, crestfallen, both at himself and how fast the kid moved. Another niggling struck him. The fear he'd grappled with from the very beginning. The fear that this kid had been abused in a very different but no less vile sort of way. "Sorry," Clint grimaced. "I shouldn't have touched you when you weren't... sorry." But the kid didn't look upset or scared or furious at Clint for the blind touch. Something else furrowed his brow. A bit of confusion, sure. Curiosity. Clint registered it after a beat. Clint didn't even want to imagine how long it had been since a man had touched this kid with something other than violent or selfish intent. Just a comfort for basic human contact. Underneath the curiosity layered something else. The same something he had caught on days the boy pretended to read in the hope that Clint would go away, but his pages stopped flipping halfway through Clint's rambling story. The same look he'd worn staring at the distilled water. Clint retreated to the farthest birch tree, at the head of the hammock. His legs stretched out in front of him, and with the untextured tree bark at his back, it made for a fairly comfy perch. He gazed up at the stars through breaks in the clouds, hands folded in his lap, and let out a terse breath strained in his diaphragm since he first heard that wretched pleading. After a minute, the kid stood on shaky giraffe legs and climbed back into his hammock. He rinsed his mouth and lay on his side, sniffling. No point asking the boy if he wanted to talk about it. Even if he was a normal teen, this wasn't an "I got chased by a monster" nightmare, predictable in its categorization. This one had been a memory, a hellish one. Clint was bet his bow on it. For 45 solid minutes, by Clint's internal clock, they both slouched in total silence. Mostly silent. Deer wandered past at one point, two cotton-tailed does who either didn't see them or didn't care. Clint held the hoodie behind his head, and a small hand tugged it out of his grip. Shuffling as the soiled t-shirt was cast off, the zipper slid upwards, then shimmying before all went still again. Clint listened to crickets and that pesky barn owl. "Couldn't sleep," he said, sotto voice. The kid stirred, still awake then, probably listening, like Clint. "I can never take out my hearing aid either, not since the Christmas fiasco. I kept feeling this itch under my skin." Weariness lowered Clint's defences a little. "You telling me to leave replayed in my head 100 times tonight, and hurt just as much as the first. Which you had every right to do, by the way. Boundaries are important." More shuffling. Nothing makes sense anymore. My head's scrambled, which isn't a new idea, I suppose, if you know my history. Clint's eyes darkened for a moment. But it's as if someone scraped out the contentment inside my chest when I wasn't looking, scooped me out with a spoon and left the cavern to dry in an icy desert. High elfin breaths paused. It doesn't make sense, right? My life is better now than it was during those 5 years. I have everything. Clint swallowed. Everything. And yet. Remembered gurgles, from his swords to men's throats, echoed in Clint's ears. The sounds of his own sobs when he slept on the floor of an abandoned warehouse in a faraway cities that would never know his name. I figured if I got my family back, everything would go back to normal. I'd go back to normal, being me. just me. I can enjoy my life properly without having to pretend. I think I pretend a lot some days. The does trotted into the distance, on their way to wherever home and fawn nests were in the untouched wilderness of this forest. Their white tails flipped up, pale, fuzzy stars in the dim. Clint leaned his back on the tree, just below the hammock ties. It's weird, you know. We did this big thing, travelled through time, and everybody's over the moon about it. But we didn't do it for everybody. We did it for specific people. I wouldn't have volunteered myself to be Stark's guinea pig if it hadn't been for my missing family. A gunpowder trail sprinkled through Clint's tailbone. Saying Stark's name out loud for the first time in months struck a match, and the flame hissed on its winding track around his spine. All this is to say, I get nightmares too. Clint rubbed his nose. I get feeling trapped in everybody else's happy ending. The barn owl hooted, and Clint trailed off. He wished Nat was here. He wished he could tease Tony one more time about tin cans and overcompensating. He wished Morgan would grow up with a father. He wished and yearned for a lot of things that would never come true. Pennies and wishes and glowing stones and warmth spilled across Clint's hair, just at the top, the crown, and he held his breath. It felt like a small egg yolk breaking over his scalp, roosting there like Nellie on her hay. The boy's hand patted Clint once and then just sat there. Clint's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled, his whole body unspooled, lax with the release of pent-up tension and worry. This was the teenager's first initiation of positive contact with an adult in God knew how long. His thumb hung above Clint's right ear, and when Clint's breath hitched, it began to swish back and forth through the shorter strands where his fade used to be. I did it for this, Clint whispered. He didn't wipe his eyes, but let the tears fall as they willed. I'm just trying to help, kid, one person at a time. The hand twitched, curling into knuckles that nuzzled Clint's head. We all lost people, huh? The thumb tapped. Yeah, me too. I'm putting one foot in front of the other, trying to live up to what she died for. But it gets better when it's quiet like this, when people can just be people. The hand clenched in his hair, reflexive emotion. I wouldn't lie to you, kid. There were days I didn't want to get out of bed when I came home, even though I found my family there. Days jumping off the bridge down the road sounded real nice. Some days it still does, more appealing than going downstairs for breakfast. Clint kept that part to himself. The boy made a noise in his throat. It coaxed the smile back onto Clint's face, salty and tear-bitten. Intense empathy. Clint added it to the observation list. If I can try, one day at a time, so can you. With help, that's the key. The hand pulled away, and Clint mourned for that for all of 2 seconds before it landed on his left shoulder. Wilted. Whether from emotion or sleep, Clint couldn't say, and didn't turn around to check. The kid had baby fingers to match what should have been a baby face, with more calories in it. Slender, dexterous, no calluses. Smaller than either of his teens, even though Clint was pretty sure this kid had to be older than both. He gazed, soft, at the hand and then closed his eyes. They breathed, sighed at the same time. The night passed in galaxy shadows over Clint, and the hand, and the boy, a fulcrum point of the universe in all its chaotic splendor. The kid didn't let go of him until cobalt sunshine visited the horizon. I'd like to place a call to this number, extension 89. Please state your area code. Clint stood at the kitchen window, jaw a Zamboni drifting across the ice of his uncertainty, slowly on its way to one side, back to the center, off to the left. Nate was down for a nap, the only one of his 3 kids who loved sleeping in the middle of the day. Laura had left for a grocery run into town. Clint scratched his stubble. Area code, sir? The automated voice revealed herself to be a real person. Clint steeled himself. Code Lansdowne. The click of a security monitor logging onto the call, then the bass-pitch brrrr sound of it dialing. Clint imagined Gary from operations, wondered if he still had his job at the silent ear behind sensitive calls. "What can I do for you, Mr. Barton?" Clint rolled his eyes. "Hey, Janie, can you put your boss on the phone?" "You mean our boss?" "Not anymore, Jay. I know you know that, since you addressed me as Mr. and not Agent." Spoil sport. "I have 3 kids, Janie, oldest insult in the book. So, your boss? It's urgent." A beat. "Must be a bad one if you can't tell me." "Janie." All right. Forgive me if the first Avenger to call me in 6 months isn't a little exciting." Clint straightened. "Bruce hasn't checked in with updates." "Nah, he filters everything through Cap. Wilson called me back in November with a heads up about an ultra-enhanced bomb threat in Cyprus." "Yikes." "He and Barnes defused it in 20 minutes. Russia made components, so he came in handy." Of course they did." Clint shook his head. Exhibit V on why he didn't miss that life. "This isn't anything quite so exotic, but it is important." "I'll patch you through right away. She just left a meeting with NATO, so she's got margin time before her next conference call." "Thanks, Janie. You're the world's toughest communications manager. And don't you forget it." The security monitor clicked off the call, and Clint couldn't help himself. "Bye, Gary. Thanks for the accountability." A series of long and short clicks. Just 2 letters, really. Clint snickered at the Morse code. "Only you could flip me the bird from 3,000 miles away. Talk to you later, pal." After a bit of waiting and run around, a voice Clint hadn't heard for almost a year coughed into the phone. "Barton, is the world ending? Because unless you're phoning in a nuclear war, I'm busy." Clint rested his forehead on the cool window glass. "Hello to you too." "I have a sinus infection and the new Ugandan president kept offering me strong coffee to help. Pretty sure it just had vodka in it. Forgive me if I'm not at my peppiest." "Things have been insane since the blip and everyone coming back, and that's not counting all the S.H.I.E.L.D. revealed as Hydra stuff. I don't envy your job right now." "Always a ray of sunshine, Clint. That's why we love you." "Must be weird, pretending Fury is dead." "Hey, I'm still director. The one who does all the paperwork and schmoozing and making sure Barnes doesn't start another international incident. Fury ceded the job to me and says he likes operating in the shadows better than as a company figurehead anyway." Clint smirked. "Behind every great woman is a dead man. You can take that to the bank." Clint eyed the gust of wind over the trees outside. "Thanks for making time, Maria." Hill snorted. "Don't get warm and fuzzy on me yet. I haven't agreed to anything." Clint closed his eyes. He sighed, fogging the glass. "You know what? This call was a mistake. Never mind. Sorry to waste your time." Maria Hill's voice carried unquestioning authority, even stuffed with snot. "Barton, don't you dare hang up on me. Now I'm interested. I hate being interested without a payoff." He'd forgotten that. Memories of late poker nights, games, and drinking contests and long-term undercover ops in suburban neighborhoods flashed before his eyes. Maria was feline in her need to understand things. "It's really—" Clint bumped the glass with a fist. "It's all mixed up anyway. I don't think I should ask you what I want to ask you." Maria blew her nose. It crackled across the line, and Clint held the phone away from his ear. The glug 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 sounds signaled her drinking water. "Clint." Her voice warmed. "What's up, honestly?" Would it be possible to gain some sway over CPS decisions? Halt memos before they reach judges and things like that, just in case." "Child services? What do I look like, an amateur? I can have CPS social workers putting on a dinner theatre production by the end of the day if I want." The words clogged in Clint's throat. Natasha's voice wrapped around him again, that the kid would hate him should he go through with this. "Clint?" Maria was back to being firm. "Is one of your kids in danger?" Or is Ross giving you a hard time, even though we scrapped the accords in your house arrest? Has someone threatened? No, Maria. Clint wouldn't normally interrupt the director if he wanted to keep both his pinky fingers, but even those imagined scenarios sent him spiraling. Nothing like that, just put a pin in that question, okay? I had to know. I can't sleep not knowing what CPS might do in the event that... In the event of what? That it all catches up. Clinton. Clint heard the warning. Tell you what, if this situation works out without anybody dying or my wife hating me for what life, I'll have you over for a home-cooked meal and explain everything. Throw in a beer and you have a deal. Easy bargain, Clint said, genuine. They chatted about each other's lives for a minute or two. She'd taken up aerial yoga in her limited free time, and Clint shared Nate's new obsessive love for animal care before saying goodbye. Clint hung up and gazed out over the forest canopy, as if he could magically see through it to where the kid lay. I made a promise, kid. I won't report you missing unless it's for your own good. That didn't stop him from lying awake, staring at the mobile for hours that night.